You did the work. You faced your shadows, healed old wounds, integrated rejected parts of yourself. And now, nothing. No drive, no spark, no motivation. Worse, you can't explain why you should feel better, but you're wondering if you broke something inside yourself. This is one of the most confusing and isolating experiences anyone can have after a period of intense personal growth. You followed all the steps: therapy, shadow work, trauma healing, integration of parts. The symptoms improved, patterns dissolved, anxiety decreased. But something unexpected happened in place of the promised happiness. Emptiness, silence, a disturbing stillness where there used to be urgency. Our culture sells us a dangerous lie about personal growth, that it is linear, predictable, and that healing automatically means feeling better. Problem, therapy, resolution, happiness. But Carl Jung knew something that modern psychology often ignores. True psychological transformation does not follow this comforting logic. Jung wrote that the collapse of the persona is often mistaken for depression. He understood that when you finish digging into your unconscious, when you pull all the buried shame, unmet needs, and childhood wounds to the surface, you don't just feel better. You feel fundamentally different, disturbingly different. And that difference isn't pathology, it's transformation. What you are experiencing is not the end of your healing journey. It is a sign that your psyche is undergoing a fundamental reorganization. That motivation you lost, it was never really yours to begin with. There is something no one tells you about shadow work, something Carl Jung knew but rarely spoke about directly. When you finish digging through your unconscious, when you have faced all the rejected parts of yourself, your entire motivational system does not just change, it completely disintegrates. And this disintegration is not a bug in the process. It is the process working exactly as it should. Think about it. For years, maybe decades, you were motivated by unconscious forces: the need to be loved, the fear of abandonment, the compulsion to prove your worth, the terror of not being enough. These weren't conscious choices. They were survival mechanisms running in the background, pushing you forward, keeping you busy, making you productive. These forces were like an invisible engine. You woke up in the morning and knew exactly what to do, not because you consciously chose to, but because something inside you was desperately trying to avoid rejection, prove competence, gain approval, escape loneliness. It was motivation, yes, but it was motivation based on open wounds. But shadow work doesn't just heal those wounds. It exposes the entire machinery. Suddenly, you can see how much of your life has been driven by fear disguised as ambition. How much of your motivation was really just avoiding pain dressed up as seeking pleasure. When that machinery stops working, when those unconscious engines are no longer driving you, you don't just lose motivation. You lose the only reasons you ever had to be motivated. This is what Jung called the necessary dissolution before rebirth. But no one prepares you for how silent it feels in the space between who you were and who you are becoming. Let me tell you about Sarah. That's not her real name, but the story is completely true. Sarah spent 2 years in intensive therapy after a devastating breakup revealed patterns she had been carrying since childhood. She did the work. EMDR, inner child healing, parts work, shadow integration. She faced everything there was to face. At the end of those 2 years, she was genuinely healed. The anxiety that had driven her for decades was gone. The compulsive need to please everyone dissolved. The paralyzing fear of being alone turned into genuine self-companionship. By all traditional markers, she was fine. Better than fine. She was whole. But when she tried to return to her career in marketing, something was deeply wrong. Not wrong in a bad way, just empty. The campaigns that used to excite her seemed meaningless. The client meetings that once energized her left her feeling hollow. The promotions she had pursued for years suddenly seemed like elaborate distractions from something she couldn't name. "I used to wake up every morning with fire in my belly," she told me. "Even if it was anxiety, even if it was fear, it was fuel. Now I wake up and feel nothing. Like I'm waiting for instructions from a voice that isn't speaking." Sarah wasn't depressed in the clinical sense. She was able to function perfectly well. She didn't feel worthless or hopeless. She just wasn't motivated by the same things anymore. And without those familiar carrots and sticks, she didn't know how to move forward. This is the phase Jung called nigredo in psychological alchemy, the necessary blackening, the darkness that must happen before new life can emerge. In medieval alchemy, nigredo was decay, the death of the old form before any transformation could begin. But here's what makes this so confusing in our culture. We've been taught that healing should be good, that growth should be linear, that progress should be measurable. We expect shadow work to work like taking medicine. You feel bad, you take the pill, you feel better. Instead, shadow work often works like surgery. The procedure is successful, but the recovery is long, strange, and nothing like you expected. During this phase, you may find yourself unable to care about things that used to matter deeply. Career goals that seemed vital now seem arbitrary. Relationships that excited you may seem performative. Hobbies that brought you joy may feel forced. This is not depression in the clinical sense. You are not hopeless or feeling worthless. You are not unable to function. You're simply no longer motivated by the same things. And without familiar motivation, without those familiar nudges, you're lost in the midst of something that should be celebrated. Jung understood this as a sign that your psyche is undergoing a fundamental reorganization. The ego, your sense of separate self, is no longer in charge, but the self, your deepest, most authentic essence, has not yet fully emerged. You are in the in-between space, the liminal realm, the void that exists between one way of being and another, and your psyche is protecting you from going back. It is refusing to let you re-engage with motivations that were never truly yours. But it has not yet revealed what will motivate you going forward. This is not laziness. This is not failure. This is not even stagnation. It is your soul taking a sacred pause before the next phase of your becoming. Pause here and take a deep breath. What you are carrying, this feeling that you should be more motivated, more excited, more alive than you are. This is exactly what your psyche is protecting you from feeling. The truth is, your psyche is refusing to let you re-engage with motivations that were never truly yours. But it hasn't yet revealed what will motivate you going forward. This isn't laziness. This isn't failure. This isn't even stagnation. It's your soul taking a sacred pause before the next phase of your becoming. In traditional cultures, this emptiness was honored as a necessary part of spiritual development. Vision quests, dark nights of the soul, initiation rites, all recognize that growth often requires a period of dissolution, of not knowing, of emptiness. But we live in a culture that pathologizes stillness, that medicalizes mystery, that tries to fix what may not even be broken. Jung warned that if we try to skip this phase, if we rush back into action before the transformation is complete, we risk building a new life on the same old foundations. We may look different on the outside, but we will be running the same unconscious programs that brought us to the need for shadow work in the first place. Here is the truth that changes everything. Silence is not a sign of collapse. It is a sacred pause before transformation. Every motivation you've ever had based on fear, social expectations, proving your worth, avoiding pain, all of that is gone. Not because you're broken, but because you've outgrown it. Your soul is literally refusing to act again. Jung put it perfectly when he said, "You are not failing. You are halfway there." Think about what motivation used to mean to you. If you're honest, really honest, how much of your drive came from trying to earn love? How much came from fear of not being enough? How much was just anxiety dressed up as productivity? When you do shadow work, when you truly integrate these unconscious patterns, you don't just heal the wounds. You stop believing that your value depends on your performance. You stop believing that love needs to be earned. You stop believing that you are only valuable when you are producing something. And when those beliefs die, the motivation they fed dies with them. This is what Jung meant when he talked about the death of the persona. The persona is the mask we wear to fit into society, the character we perform to get our needs met. But it's not who we really are. It's who we think we need to be in order to survive. Shadow work rips off the persona. It reveals the difference between your authentic self and the self you've been performing. And once you see that difference, you can't unsee it. The problem is that most of your life has been organized around this performative self. Your career, your relationships, your goals, your entire sense of purpose. Everything has been designed to feed and maintain a version of yourself that you now recognize as incomplete at best, false at worst. So what happens when that version of yourself dies, but you haven't yet figured out who you really are underneath? You feel unmotivated because true motivation can only come from truth, and the truth is still emerging. Let me share another story. David, a successful architect, spent 3 years working through childhood trauma and attachment wounds. The healing process was profound. He felt more at peace than he had ever felt in his life. But when he tried to return to work, designing buildings, managing projects, climbing the corporate ladder, he felt like he was wearing clothes that no longer fit. Not uncomfortable exactly, just wrong. Like he was playing a character in a play he no longer believed in. "I used to be so determined," he told me. "I worked 60 hours a week and loved it. I had 5-year plans, 10-year goals. I knew exactly what I wanted and exactly how to get it. Now I look at those same goals and feel nothing. It's like they belong to someone else." David thought he was depressed. He went to the doctor, considered medication, wondered if he needed more therapy. But what he was experiencing wasn't depression. It was the natural result of profound inner change. His old motivations, proving his worth through achievement, earning his father's approval through success, avoiding the shame of failure, were no longer available to him. Shadow work had healed those wounds, integrated those needs, resolved those fears. But his new motivations, the ones that would come from his authentic self rather than his wounded ego, had not yet emerged. This is the turning point Jung spoke of. The moment when you realize that true, sustainable, lasting motivation does not come from compulsion, it comes from truth. When you are motivated by fear, you can overcome anything. Fear is an incredibly powerful fuel. It will wake you up at 5 a.m., keep you working until midnight, push you to achieve things you never thought possible. But fear-based motivation has an expiration date. Eventually, you either burn out or heal enough to stop being afraid. And when fear stops driving you, if you have nothing else to take its place, you feel empty. That emptiness isn't the problem. It's the solution. It's your psyche creating space for something new to emerge. Jung believed that the self, your deepest, most authentic essence, doesn't scream. It doesn't demand. It doesn't create drama or urgency or crisis to get your attention. The self whispers. It nudges. It invites. But if your life is full of noise, if you are constantly driven by external pressures and internal fears, you cannot hear the whisper. You cannot feel the nudge. You cannot perceive the invitation. That is why emptiness is sacred. That is why silence is necessary. And that's why losing your old motivation isn't a failure. It's preparation. Your soul is creating the conditions for you to hear what it's been trying to tell you all along. Here's what no one tells you about the other side of this emptiness. About what happens when you stop fighting the silence and start listening to what it's trying to teach you. When new motivation emerges, it feels completely different. It's not anxious. It's not urgent. It's not driven by what you don't have, or what you're trying to prove, or what you're afraid of losing. It's silent. It's constant. It's undeniable. It's like the difference between artificial light and sunlight. Both will help you see, but one nourishes, while the other merely illuminates. Jung called this the emergence of the self with a capital S. Not the ego self that needs validation, that hungers for external confirmation, that constantly compares and competes and calculates, but the deeper self that is already whole, already enough, already connected to something greater than your individual survival. When the self begins to motivate you, you don't chase after it. You respond. You don't chase opportunities like a hungry person grabbing food. You recognize them as someone who knows they belong at the table. You don't force passion as if you were trying to jumpstart a dead battery. You follow curiosity as if you were following a thread that leads to somewhere worth going. You don't create from emptiness, desperate to fill a hole. You create from a place of fullness, because something inside you is so alive that it needs to express itself. Let me tell you what that looked like for David, the architect I mentioned earlier. After almost a year of feeling unmotivated and questioning everything, of wondering if he had broken something inside himself with all that therapy, something changed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't like a switch being flipped or a revelation hitting him like a bolt of lightning. It was like watching the sun rise, so gradual that you hardly notice it happening until suddenly the world is full of light and you can't remember when the darkness ended. He started taking long walks without his cell phone. Not for exercise, not as a productivity hack he had read about, not as networking opportunities. Just walking. Movement for movement's sake. Being outside for the sake of being outside. No agenda, no goal, no measure of success or failure. During one of these walks, he noticed an old building that had been abandoned for years. He had passed it thousands of times without really seeing it. But on that day, something about its bones, its structure, its potential, its sadness, its dignity despite being forgotten, something spoke to him in a way that nothing had in months. Instead of dismissing the feeling, or trying to turn it into a business opportunity, or analyze why he was attracted to decay and abandonment, he just went with it. He started visiting the building regularly. He started drawing. Not architectural plans, not renovation plans, but just impressions. How the building felt. What it wanted to become. What story it was trying to tell. This wasn't driven by career goals or financial incentives. It wasn't motivated by proving his worth, or impressing anyone or building his portfolio. It was motivated by something completely different. By curiosity, by beauty, by a sense of rightness that he couldn't explain, but didn't need to explain. By the simple fact that this building had something to say, and he had suddenly developed the ability to listen. He spent weeks just drawing, just sitting, just being present with this structure that no one else seemed to notice. And slowly, gently, without force or urgency, an idea began to emerge. Not a business plan, not a strategic initiative, but a vision, a possibility, a what-if that felt more real than anything he had worked on in years. Eventually, that curiosity led to conversations with the building's owner. Those conversations led to other conversations. Those conversations led to a unique restoration project unlike anything he had done before. One that honored the building's history while creating space for new life. One that involved the community in unexpected ways. One that felt less like imposing his will on the structure and more like collaborating with its essence. That project led to a new direction in his career. One that felt aligned with who he was becoming rather than who he had been. But here's the key insight. None of this would have happened if he had tried to force his old motivation back. If he had pushed through the emptiness, ignored the silence, and returned to his old way of working, he would have walked past that building for another 10 years without seeing it. He would have continued designing spaces that looked impressive, but felt empty. He would have remained successful, but hungry for meaning. Productive, but without purpose. The self doesn't roar. It hums. It doesn't demand attention. It offers invitations. It doesn't create urgency. It creates resonance. When you learn to hear that hum, when you learn to trust that gentle guidance, when you learn to recognize the difference between ego impulse and self-magnetism, motivation stops being about overcoming your resistance and starts being about following your resonance. You write because you have something to share, not because you need views or validation or proof that you're smart enough. You create because beauty is moving through you, not because you need to be seen as creative. You love because connection is your nature, not because you're afraid of being alone. You work because the work itself calls you, not because you need to prove your worth through productivity. This is what Jung meant when he talked about living symbolically. Not living in fantasy or delusion, or spiritual bypass, but living in conscious connection with the deeper patterns, the meaningful coincidences, the synchronicities that reveal how your individual story fits into the larger story of existence. How your personal healing serves something greater than your personal comfort. When you are motivated by the self rather than the ego, work becomes devotion rather than obligation. Relationships become conscious choice rather than unconscious necessity. Creativity becomes expression rather than performance. Rest becomes nourishment rather than laziness. And here's the paradox that would have shocked your old self. This gentler motivation often accomplishes more than the frantic energy that came before, because it's sustainable, because it's aligned with who you really are rather than who you think you should be, because it's coming from fullness rather than emptiness, from love rather than fear, from truth rather than compulsion. There's an exercise I want to offer here. It's simple, but it can help you discern between ego motivation and self-motivation in your own life. It can help you recognize which voice is speaking when you feel called to action or when you don't. Take a piece of paper and write down 3 things you feel you should be motivated to do right now. Things you think you should want, should pursue, should care about. Then ask yourself, where does this should come from? Whose voice is it really? Who would be disappointed if I didn't care about this? What am I trying to escape by wanting this? What am I trying to prove by pursuing this? Then write down 3 things that you find yourself drawn to, even if they don't make logical sense. Things that spark curiosity or wonder or peace. Things that make you feel more alive, more present, more yourself. Ask yourself, what would it be like to follow this attraction without having to justify it? What would it be like to trust this attraction without having to understand it completely? The difference between these 2 lists can show you the difference between motivation that comes from fear and motivation that comes from truth. Between an impulse that exhausts you and an attraction that nourishes you. Between the voice of your wounded ego and the whisper of your authentic self. Here's what I want you to understand. At the deepest level possible, you haven't lost your motivation. You've just outgrown the reasons that once drove you. This isn't a consolation prize. This isn't settling for less. This is graduating to a deeper level of life. This is your psyche refusing to let you settle for performance when authenticity is available. The silence you fear, the emptiness you've been trying to fill, that's where your true self has been waiting to speak. The emptiness you've been trying to fill, that space is being created for something more real, more sustainable, more genuinely you than anything you've experienced before. Jung didn't promise that this would be easy. He never said that individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, would be comfortable, or quick, or simple. He knew it required walking through the valley of not knowing, the desert of not feeling, the emptiness of not being sure of anything. But he also knew that on the other side of that desert, there is an oasis, not the mirage you've been chasing. The perfect life, the perfect job, the perfect relationship, the perfect version of yourself, but something real, something that doesn't have to be perfect because it's true. The motivation that emerges from this place doesn't exhaust you because it's not coming from a place of deficit. It doesn't leave you empty because it's not taking more than it gives. It doesn't disappear when circumstances change because it's rooted in who you are, not what you want. If you're in the void right now, if you're feeling unmotivated and wondering what's wrong with you, I want you to consider this. Maybe nothing is wrong. Maybe something is very, very right. Maybe your soul is finally strong enough to stop performing. Maybe your psyche is finally integrated enough to distinguish between authentic desire and inherited obligation. Maybe you're finally healed enough to wait for real inspiration instead of running on manufactured urgency. Listen to the silence, not with your ears, but with your heart. What has it been trying to tell you? What has it been protecting you from? What has it been preparing you for? Sarah, the marketing executive I mentioned, discovered through this process that her fear-based motivation in marketing was covering up a deep desire to work with children. Not because she thought she should, not because it would look good to others, not because it would solve her problems or prove her worth, but because something in her came alive when she was around children. Something that had been buried under years of trying to be who she thought she was supposed to be. It took her 2 years to make the transition from marketing executive to elementary school teacher. 2 years of following curiosity instead of clarity, of trusting the process instead of controlling the outcome. 2 years of taking small steps toward what felt true instead of giant leaps toward what seemed impressive. Her friends thought she was crazy. Her family worried about the pay cut. Her logical mind had a million objections. But her soul was singing again for the first time in decades. Your old life, the one driven by fear and need and an endless hunger for external validation, that life is over. You did the work to end it. You faced your shadow specifically, so you wouldn't have to live that way anymore. This isn't the end of your healing journey. This is the beginning of your authentic life. This is where the real adventure begins. The self you are becoming doesn't need motivation in the old sense. It needs recognition. It needs confidence. It needs you to stop trying so hard to become someone else and start paying attention to who you already are. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not failing. You are exactly where you need to be for the next phase of your becoming to begin. And when it begins, when that quiet buzz of authentic motivation starts to emerge, you'll understand why the silence was so necessary. You'll see why the emptiness had to be emptied before it could be filled with something real. You'll realize that losing your old motivation wasn't a problem to be solved. It was a gift to be received. The gift of finally being free to discover what you are really here for. There is a moment in every person's journey when they stop asking themselves, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What is trying to emerge through me?" When they stop trying to fix what they think is broken and start trusting what is trying to be born. That moment may be now. That moment may be this silence. That moment may be that emptiness you have feared, which is actually the womb of your next life. The emptiness is not the end of your story. It is the comma between the life you have lived and the life you are meant to live. And that life, that authentic life, waiting on the other side of transformation. That life that emerges not from fear, but from truth. Not from compulsion, but from choice. Not from performance, but from presence. That life is worth waiting for. It is worth every moment of uncertainty, every day of not knowing, every night of wondering if you are on the right path. Because when you finally find it, when you finally allow it to find you, you will understand that you were never lost. You were just on the longest, deepest, truest path home. And home is not a place you go to. It is who you are when you stop pretending to be someone else.
If you've made it this far, you've already taken a step beyond most people. You're subscribed to the channel, you watch the videos, you reflect on every idea. Now the question is, how far do you want to take this? If you want to take the next step and truly apply this knowledge to your life, the White Rabbit Codes is ready for you. The link is in the pinned comment. Remember, success is a decision. The choice is yours. Count on me and follow the White Rabbit.